Welcome back to part 5 of the full stack web development 0 to Hero series. Today we're going to be covering MySQL, which is a relational database management system and is actually one of the most commonly used databases across the web. Now, in this video we're going to be using some PHP towards the end, I believe, so make sure that you have watched part 4 of the series, or at the very least you have some basic knowledge of PHP before carrying on with this video. So as usual, we're going to be looking at the ins and outs of this language, if you like, MySQL. And let's start at the very top. What exactly is a database? Because as you know, MySQL is a database management system. So what is a database? Well, a database is simply put a container where you store data that you can later come back to it, access it, and retrieve it. So that's the simple definition that I can give you. Basically, imagine a literal container where you have some sort of information written on a piece of paper, you store it in this container, and then you go back, do your thing, and then after 2 hours you want to retrieve this data. You come back to the container, pull it, see all the data that you stored previously, and you just know that all the data that you have is always sitting there on the database or in that container and is available for you to access anytime. And that is basically a database. Now we will be creating our database in this video, and to do that we need to make sure that we actually have MySQL installed and running. So let's jump right into that. Now for Mac users who are not using XAMPP, you can go ahead and Google, let's pull up the browser here, and we'll Google install MySQL on Mac, and then we'll actually type in install MySQL on Mac terminal and hit the first link right here, and I will copy this link into the description so you can pull it from there if you need to. Basically all you need to do is run this command, brew install MySQL. Let me zoom in, and in order to do that you need to make sure you have Homebrew installed as well. So if you don't have Homebrew installed, just go into this link and copy this and paste it into your terminal, and that should install Homebrew for you. And from there you can just run the same command, brew install MySQL, and that should install MySQL for you. Now once you've done that, all you need to do then is start the MySQL command or the MySQL server using this command, brew services start MySQL, and that should start the service for you. And then you can simply log in, and the way to log in would be to use this command right here, MySQL space -u, and then the name of the user, which is root. The default name of the user is root, and then dash or space -p. So just copy and paste this, and if you're successful, it will prompt you to type in a password. Just hit enter to enter an empty password, and then if you're successful and you've logged in, you'll see this right here. As you can see, this is the command, enter password, hit enter, and then it will open up and it'll tell you welcome to the MySQL monitor, and you'll see this MySQL with a greater than sign. That means you're logged in and you're ready to hit the commands and start using MySQL. Now for Linux is going to be slightly similar. I think with Linux you'll have PHP and MySQL out of the box. If you don't, then you can go to the link in the description to install XAMPP if you haven't, and get MySQL up and running. And then to log in you can just use the same command again. And for those who are using XAMPP, what you can do is go to the control panel, make sure that it's running MySQL and PHP, and then run one of the commands in the description. So you will have one of these commands right here. Let me just go to and create a file very quickly. Let's say text. Right here you'll have these commands, they'll be in the description. For Windows you'll run this, which is the default installation folder for XAMPP. For Mac OS you can run this, and for Linux you can run this. and you should be able to just log in. So I'm running on a Mac. What I'm going to do is pull up the terminal, and we're going to open up a new terminal right here. And once that's ready, we're going to go back to our, actually we could do it from right here. We'll just hit MySQL, U, root, P, enter password, and it's just an empty password. And as you can see, I am right now logged in to MySQL. I'm going to redo that just because the screen was small. So MySQL, U, root, P, -P, and hit enter. And as you can see, I'm logged in right now into MySQL, and I can run commands. So hopefully you've gotten into this stage. If you're having issues or if you're facing any errors, feel free to leave a comment or reach out to me somehow. And you can also Google, and I'm sure you'll find a solution to your problem. But main thing is you need to make sure that you're running MySQL so you can move forward with this video. So let's get started. Now, within MySQL itself, you'll have multiple databases, and within these databases you usually have different tables. So the data is usually stored within these tables, and these tables are made up of rows and columns. So the data is stored in the form of rows and columns. And we're going to actually look at the data types that you have available for you in MySQL. So just like PHP and JavaScript, they have their own data types where you can use a string, an integer or a number, an object, an array, Boolean, etc. With MySQL, it's quite similar in that the different fields that are going to be held in the database or the table have certain data types. So this is the first thing we're going to cover. And to begin with, we're going to create a new file, and we're going to name it index.php. Let me just get rid of this file. New file, index.php. Put in the tags. And you might be wondering, why are we using PHP? Well, I'm just going to be writing comments here. So I figured you can benefit from having some comments saved, and I thought the best way to do this, we could just put in a PHP file. We could use a JavaScript as well, but let's just stick to PHP since we're going to be using PHP later on in the video. Now, the first set of data types that I want to go through are, let's leave a comment here. Excuse the noise, I should probably close the window, but it's quite hot in here. So data types in MySQL. First ones we want to cover is the char or char data type, which is basically for characters. You can store different characters here, and the length of this usually you'd have parentheses and n, and the n basically tells the database the amount of characters that this will take, so the length of characters. So here we have n is smaller than or equal to 255, which is the byte size basically. And an example of this would be the word hello. This uses 5 bytes, right? Whereas something like nice would use how many bytes? 4 bytes. So just the length of the word that we're using, or the characters that we're using. Next up, we have the varchar, which is similar to the string in the different languages that we've covered so far. And this basically takes up a value or a length of smaller than or equal to 65535. And this basically has the same thing. So if I use the word, let's say goodbye, this will use 7 bytes and so on. So that's it for characters. We've got characters or char and varchar. This is for usually like a string. and these are for little characters or short string where you know the amount of characters are going to be, whether they're going to be 10 for example in length or 3 for example. So you're basically just restricting it. We also have binary or binary or byte, so one of these two, with an n again, which is the length. Again, n smaller than 25 or 255, 255. So this is like a car, but contains binary data. As car, but contains binary data, which is basically, for example, if you had an image and you wanted to store the data of that image, you could store it in a binary field. For example, if you had again a GIF and you wanted to store the contents of that, you can use a binary field. You also have var binary, again similar to var car, but stores or contains binary data, and this goes up to the same amount. So I'm actually going to just copy and paste this here, copy and paste this here, var car, there we go. So that's the binary data types. We also have the text. So we've got tiny text, which takes in an amount of up to smaller than or up to 255, and this is the length once again, or the bytes used, and we treat it as a string. We've got text, which is similar to tiny text, but it takes up a lot more text. So this is used for say you have comments on your website, or you have articles that are pretty long, so you'd use something similar to this. And you also have the medium text, which takes up a lot more text, and you could use this for things that are going to take a whole amount of space in terms of text. Personally, I've only used up to text. I've never had to use medium text or long text, which is the last type of text. And this one takes up to smaller than or up to 4.29 e plus 9. And these are huge numbers, you know, but just writing down the figures so that you have them. You can always find this online as well. And these are all treated as strings with a character set. So you might be wondering, what is the difference between varchar and text? Again, varchar is usually used for shorter strings, strings that you know the length of. For example, an email is not going to be more than 100 characters. So you could limit this to 100 or 255, which is the common one that's used. And a text is for much greater content. We also have a data type called blob. So we've got tiny blob, blob, medium blob, and long blob again. And for tiny blob, this again goes up to 255. I'm gonna have to copy them one by one. 255, and then a blob also has the same amount, and the medium blob goes up to this amount, and the long blob goes up to this amount. And this also holds binary data, and we're just going to have a look at this again. What does the blob data type in MySQL? What is the use of blob data type in MySQL? A binary large object is a MySQL data type that can store binary data such as images, multimedia, and PDF files. So this is similar to what we've looked at previously in binary, but it usually holds that data is much larger than just a binary. So you've got these, and you also have the integer data type. So you have tiny int, which is usually used for, because it only takes 1 byte, or 1 byte is used for this. It's basically like the Boolean where you have true or false or 1 and 0. So you usually use tiny int for that. So let's say you had some data and you wanted to mark it as active or inactive. You can use 1 for active and 0 for inactive. And you've got small int, which goes up to 32767. Now here you have something called signed and unsigned. So I'm just going to create some headers here. Signed. Excuse me. Okay, this is not looking good. There we go. So for tiny int, although it's 1 byte used, you have up to 127 for signed and 255 for unsigned. So you can use these values if you use signed or unsigned. And we're going to cover how to set them as signed or unsigned. For small int, signed looks like this. Whoops. And unsigned goes up to 65535. You also have medium int, which uses 3 byte sizes. This uses 2. Small int uses 2. Medium int uses 3 byte sizes. And it goes up to crazy numbers. So I can't actually type in all of these numbers, but you get the idea, and you can always look these up. Int, integer, uses 4 byte sizes, but again, these numbers are crazy, so I'm going to leave them out. But this is usually used for different columns that require an integer or number. Say you have a column that identifies the user's ID, you can use integer, or you can use big int if you know the numbers are going to get crazy, or you have millions of users. This uses 8 bytes, and you have a float and a double real. And this one uses 8 as well, and float uses 4 bytes. So basically, the more bytes you use, the more data that is, or the more memory that takes, or storage. So just keep that in mind. These are the data types that we have. Var for text and characters, binary, and var binary for data, tiny text for longer text, text, medium, and basically all of these are usually for longer text. Tiny blob and all these blobs again for data files like images, etc. Tiny int all the way up to double is for numbers. So just depending on your scenario or the application or website that you're working on, you would choose one of these data types. So I'm just trying to expose you to all of them. And besides these, you only have the data or the date data types. So we've got date time, which has a format of say 0000 0000, and then the time, hour, minute, seconds. So that's the year, the month, the date, hour, minute, seconds. And then you have the other data type called date, which is just the date without the time. So we're going to copy this and put it right here. And then you have the time, which is obviously just the time without the date. So we're going to copy this and put it right here. And then you have the timestamp, which is identical to this. And then you have the year. And for the year, you have basically 4 digits. And it's only the years from 0000 and 1901 to 2155. Now the difference between date time and timestamp is that date time is limited to a certain date, so it goes up to I think 2000 and maybe 300 or 2100 and something years, but timestamp is open. So there's no limit with that, I believe. Again, you can always verify this stuff on the web, but the main point of this section is to cover or have a look at the data types that we have. And as you can see, these are the data types that we have. So everything that you store in a MySQL database or a table in the database in MySQL is going to have one of these data types. So moving on, we will look at how to use unassigned or signed. So as you can see, you can use a tiny int. At the same time, it can be 127. The value can go up to 127, or it can be 255, right? So how do we choose? Well, to give you a preview of the commands, we'll do another comment here, and to create a unassigned, say unassigned int, what we'll do is we'll just add a command here that we'll refer back to later. So create table will help us create a table, and then you give it the table name. So we'll give it the table name here, and then the field inside the table that we want to create. So say we have a table for, or we have data basically for posts on a website, right? So we'll create a table called posts to hold all of these posts, and then we'll have different columns within that. And the columns that we could have, for example, could be an ID as an identifier. We could also have the title of the post. We can have the user ID of the user who posted the post or created the post. We can have comments that are linked to this post, right? We can have an image that is linked to that post, etc. So each one of these will have a different field, and these fields will use one of these data types. So let's say we go back to title here, and we'll only do title for now. Here we'll do title, actually we'll do ID, and we'll do int since it's an integer, and then we'll do unassigned. So first you write the data type, which is either car, var, or one of these on the left, and then you do the unassigned keyword, and that should give you an unassigned data type of integer using this value, wherever this value is. So you can use a value up to this amount. Now another example would be to create a column with name ID, and the data type is integer, but this time we want to use the length, which we'll set as 4, and here we'll do 0 fill, which is usually used alongside the value here. So if you give it a value, usually you'd use 0 fill. What 0 fill does, which is a qualifier, what this does is basically fill the values in if the width is less than 4. So say for example we have instead of ID, we'll give it, what can I give it? We'll just random name, whatever that is, it doesn't really matter. Now if random name was added in and the value, for example, was 8, now if you try to retrieve this, the width of 8 is not 4 characters, it's just 1. So what 0 fill would do is basically fill this in with zeros at the start, or pad it with zeros, so that now the width, the display width is 4, as you can see here. So that's what that does. And usually this 0 fill is used in conjunction with this value. So if you've given it a value here, then you use this. But to be honest with you, usually I would just do this int, and if I want it to be slightly bigger, I would use int unassigned. But that's it really. So that's how you set up an unassigned integer data type. Quite straightforward. We will look at the commands fairly shortly, but before we look at the commands, I want to go through something called indexes, which has a bit of theory within it, so we wanted to cover that. Now, what an index is, what this does is basically allows for faster searching. So say you have tons of data within this database, and each time you're loading the website, what this website does is it hits the database, pulls the data, and pushes it back to the website, so the website is able to display this data. And each time you're making a request to the database, it's going to take the database itself or the MySQL engine some time to pull that data. And to speed this up, we use something called indexes, and this allows again for faster searching for the database. And there's 3 different types using index, or a primary key, or a full text. So we'll cover each of these. First one being the index, and the index is usually what MySQL we use to search the data. So an example of index would be right here. If you wanted to create an index, we would do something like add index, and then we would give it the name of the field. So earlier here we used random name. Again, we'll just use random name. And within here, this will basically select random name and give it the index. And you can also choose the characters that you want to index. So say if the column has a string of up to 100 characters, right? So you have a string up to 100 characters, and you want to only index the first 30 characters. So you do this, right? So what the MySQL engine would do when you start searching, it would only search the first 30 characters. It would disregard the rest of it. So if the column is 100, it would disregard the remaining 70, and it would only search within the first 30. So this would also help with the performance of the searching or the database as a whole. Now that's basically an index, which is quite straightforward really, and you can use indexes on different data types. The primary key is what we're looking at next, and the primary key is basically a unique identifier for every row. So usually a new set of data will be added to the database or to the table in the form of a row, and that row will usually have a unique identifier, and that will be named as a primary key. And that is usually useful when you're trying to retrieve data from multiple tables. And I'll give you a very quick example. Let's say we have a table of users, right? Within this users table, we have an ID, we have a name, we have an email, we have a password. Now, usually the ID will be the unique identifier. So the way you would do this is when you create this, you would set it as a primary key, or you would set it as a auto incrementer. So it will basically auto increment every time you enter a new row. For example, now we've entered a new row of John, Dada, and password, and ID will be 1. You won't even have to enter the ID for this, it will automatically update it. And then 2 would be updated as well when you enter a new row. Say Jonathan, email, password, and every time you enter a new row, this will be auto populated basically if you set it to auto increment. So what I'm saying is auto increment is a type of primary key, right? Okay, so just keep this in mind as we move forward. I know this is a lot to take in, and just by me speaking, it's not easy to understand all of it, but this is supposed to be a reference point that you can come back to in the future. So hopefully you've taken these notes, and now we can move on to the commands. But first I need to cover full text, which I've actually forgotten to do. So full text let's put a comment again. So full text is a type of index that can only be applied on a car or varchar or text data type, and it's only these data types that it works on. And what this does is it basically gives you the ability to search through these fields as if you were searching through a search engine. So you can combine different columns together, or different columns together. So let's say we have, for example, a column of author and a column of title. What you could do is create a full text using these two, and then later on you could use some type of search using this full text to search the author and the title columns together, and it will allow you to search using a more natural language like a search engine. So that's the idea of this. Again, this will make more sense when we put it to practice, but for now just remember that full text is a type of index that is only used on car, varchar and text, and it allows you to search using more natural language like that of a search engine. So that's that. We're going to move on to the commands now, and I'm going to list the commands like I did here with the data type, and then we'll start using them. So we'll just at the bottom here we'll create a new comment, and we'll say some commands, and I've actually taken this previously and I've written it out basically, so I'm just gonna comment it into this file right here. If we do this and then try to paste it. Alright, so these are the commands that we're going to be looking at. The first one up here is to show databases. So like I said, MySQL usually contains multiple databases. So if you wanted to check how many databases or what databases exist in your setup, you can do show databases, and as you can see I have a bunch of them right here. You might only have a few, like performance schema, information schema. You might also have SYS, and there might be one more in there, but that's the point of that. Show databases shows you the databases that exist. Alter a database or table is done by the alter command. Backup backs up a table. Slash or /c cancels input. Create allows you to create something, so you can create a database, you can create a table. Delete is to delete a row from a table. Describe allows you to describe a table's columns. So for example, you see I have multiple databases here. Within each database there are multiple tables, so once I jump into a database I can look at the tables and look at the table's columns using describe, which we will do in a second, but first we'll go through all of these. Drop deletes a database or table. Exit allows you to exit from MySQL right here. Grant will grant a user some privileges. So if you want a user to access a certain database and not have access to the rest of them, you can use grant to change the privileges. Help will show you the help. It will basically display the help menu. Inserts will insert new data into the table. Lock will lock a table so that it can't be used. Rename will rename a table. Show will list details about an object. So here we use show databases. So show is basically to show something about a certain object, or show details about certain objects. So you can show a table, you can show a database, and you'll get information about that. Source executes a file. Status displays the current status, and truncate empties the table. Unlock unlocks the table, so you can lock it and then unlock it. And update allows you to update an existing record. A record is basically a row in a table. And use allows you to use a database. So right here, as you can see, use is what will allow us to pick a database from these, right? So I'm gonna create a new database right here, and you can try to follow along. I'm gonna do create database, and we're going to create the database called 0 to hero, so ZTH, right? And then semicolon. And as you can see, it says query okay, one row affected. And now if I do show databases, you'll see that we have ZTH at the bottom. Now what I'm going to do is do describe. Actually, we need to use the database first. So now we do use ZTH, and now the database has changed. So now we're using ZTH. So what we can do is do show tables. So we want to see the tables within the database. And it says empty set. We have no tables in here. And so now that we've seen the tables and we have no tables here, we'll just create a table for fun so that we get used to the syntax. We'll use create. Remember, create is to create something. It could be a database, it could be a table. So we'll do create, and then we'll do, you see up here we did this actually, so we do create table and then the name of the table. So we'll create table and then the name of the table that we want to create. So here I'll just create, for example, users as a table, and then I'll hit space, and then we'll add the parentheses and basically give it the columns that we want to add. So for now I will just do ID, and then I'll do int. We want this column to be called ID, and we want to give it a data type of int, and we want it to be not null, so it will always have a value. And then we want it to be auto increment, auto underscore increment. I think that's how you spell it. And we'll do a comma, we'll add another column, and it will be name, and this one will be varchar, data type varchar, and it will be of length 255, and then we'll do comma, we'll do email, and we'll give it a data type of varchar again, and we'll do 255, and then we'll close that off, and then we close off the first parentheses that we opened up right here, right? So parentheses, and then the list of columns that we want to create separated by commas. And then do we need to do anything else? I believe you just give it a semicolon and hit enter. It says incorrect table definition. There can only be one auto column, and it must be defined as a key. So what we haven't done is we've created an auto increment, but we didn't define it as a key. So we need to give it the keyword key, right? And hit enter, and that should work. So now if we look at show tables, you'll see that we have a new table, and it's called users. If we wanted to see the structure of this table, which we just created, we can do describe users. And as you can see, we have a few headers here. We have the fields, we have the type, we have null, we have key, we have default, and we have extra. So let me try to break this down for you. Field is the name which we've given it. So we've given it ID, we've given the second row a name, or the second column a name, and the third column is named email. So we have ID, name, email. The types are integer, varchar 255 like we set it, and the email is the same type as well. The null is whether or not the row can be null. So when we enter some data into this table, can the ID be null? And no, it can't. Can the name be null? Yes, it can. And can the email be null? Yes, it can. So these are basically, this is the same as saying they're optional. Basically, they're not required, right? If it's null, that means it's not needed. But if it can't be null, that means it's required. And then the key is basically the indexes that we've given it. So here, this is a primary key. If it was an index, you would see it listed here as well. And then we have the default, and the default is basically giving it a default value. So if we added data to this table and we didn't give it a name, do we want a default name to be set, right? And we don't want a default for any of these, so we've kept them empty. And then on the extra, we've got auto increment, which is basically extra flags that we've given to each column. And for ID, we've given it auto increment. So if you don't actually give the data that you add an ID, it will just auto populate it for you. So I'll give you an example. Now, if we try to see what we have inside the users table, we can try to fetch data by doing select asterisk, which will select all columns from users. And this will show that we have no users at the minute in the table. So it returns an empty set. And let's try and enter one row so that we have some data to see. We'll use the insert command, as you can see up here. Or down here, we've got insert somewhere, it says insert data. So insert, and then the table name, which will be users, insert users, or insert into users, right? Insert into users, and then the values that we want to add. So we'll do values, and then we'll put the values in parentheses. Now, there's two ways of doing this, to be honest. The first one is when you hit users right here, when you enter users, you can do parentheses and tell the command which columns you're gonna enter. So here we're adding name and email, so that means you need to give it the name and email only, or you can leave this out, which means you're gonna give data for every single column, right? So this basically means that we need to give data for all the columns except the ID, because remember ID is set to auto increment, so it will always give it a value by itself. So we're going to give it a name, which will be a string. So we put the strings in quotes. The first name will be Jonathan, and the email for Jonathan will be jonathan@dummy.com, right? And then we want to give it another user. So between the two columns, we separate it by a comma. And then if you want another user, we can separate this whole line by a comma again. So comma, parentheses, open, close parentheses, give it a name. We'll say Gemma this time, and then Gemma@dummy.com. And let's test this out. We close the parentheses, and then we do semicolon, and you'll see it says an error, column count does not match value count at row 1. So I'm assuming because we have 3 different columns, but we're giving it 2 columns. Remember I told you if you leave the column list empty, that means you need to give it all the columns. So maybe we need to give it null, right? So we'll just press up, and that will give you the same command again. And then at the start of the parentheses, we'll give it null, and then comma. And then the second data, or the second row, we'll give it null again at the start of the parentheses. So just see what we've done again. All we've done this time is we've added null at the start for the ID, because we don't want to give it a value. So we've done null, comma, the name, comma, email, comma, and then parentheses and another user. So we hit enter this time, and as you can see, query okay, 2 rows affected, records 2. Okay, so now let's try to select all from users, and as you can see, we have 2 new entries in the users table. So now what we've done is we've literally entered some data that we're storing in the MySQL database in a table called user, and a database is called ZTH. So as you can see, the ID that we didn't enter, we actually entered null for both of them, but they've been auto-populated to 1 and 2. The names, we entered them, Jonathan, and the email just as we entered them. So that is how you describe a table, insert values into a table, and also select from a table. So say we wanted to select only the email this time, so we could do email from users instead of asterisk, and this will return the email only. We can do the same thing, but this time return the name only. So these are different commands that we can run, or queries that we can run to give us different data. that we can use on our website. So moving on, now that you understand these commands and how they can be used, we're going to actually try to run through a full example where we actually go through all the commands once again. So we're actually going to create a bigger set of data this time, slightly bigger, not too big. But what we're going to do with this is it's going to allow us to practice different things, different commands. So what we're going to do is we're going to stick to the database that we've created. We're not going to create a new database. What we will do though is we're going to create different tables. So we're going to create a new table, create table, and we're going to call it articles, right? And we want to open parentheses, close parentheses. Actually, we'll just open it for now. And then we'll do ID. I think we can spread this on different lines. Let me just check. So we do ID int uni signed or unassigned, not null, auto increment, which we've done previously, increment key, and then we'll do user ID int unassigned, not null, and I've spelled unassigned wrong, unassigned, and then comma, hit enter, title var car 128, comma, hit enter, category var car again 128, hit enter, active tiny int, and then we're going to give it a default value of 0, and then we're gonna hit enter and then close the parentheses and give it a semicolon. And as you can see, we get an error. Why are we getting this error? Because int unassigned. So I think I actually just got the spelling wrong, so let me just check. Unassigned at the start here, you don't actually need this. So I've actually got the spelling wrong. Unsigned is what we want. And if I hit enter, you should see that this should work. So we could have done it the first way, where we've set it one line after another, or we could do it this way where everything is on one line. But the idea is you need to get the spelling right, of course. So now if we show tables, you'll see that we have two tables, and if we describe the articles table, you'll see that we have an ID, a user ID, a title, a category, an active, and each type is mentioned right there. Some of them are not null, some of them are, or some of them can take null, some can't. We've only got one primary key, which is usually how it works, and there's no defaults for any of them except the active, which has a default of 0. So that's looking good. Now what we want to do is actually add some data to all of this, right? So to do that, we're going to use the insert command once again. So if you do insert into, we start with articles. How many users do we have? I don't actually remember. I think it was 2. So select from users, we have 2 users, right? So maybe we'll add 2 more users. So insert into users. We want to insert everything. So we'll do name, email, because we don't want to insert the ID. We don't want to have to type in null. There's no point in that. And then values, and then parentheses, give it the name. So another name would be Jessica, and then Jessica at dummy.com, and I think that should do it, but we want to add one more. So we'll do Aya, and Aya at dummy.com, and close the parentheses and hit semicolon, enter. Let's check what we have from users, and as you can see, we have 2 new users right here. So that's looking good. Now we want to add articles. So we'll do insert into articles. We have the user ID that we want to add, right? Actually, let's just, to remind ourselves, actually it's right here. I was going to say do describe articles, but it's right here. So we'll do insert into articles, and we want to add the user ID. We want to add the title, we want to add the category, and we want to add active as well, right? Actually, we don't want to add active for now. Let's keep it like that. And then we give it the values, so we can hit enter here, give it the values, parentheses, and we'll enter the values here. First user ID will be a number, so we'll give it, this will be Aya's article, so we'll give it 4. As you can see, ID 4 right here, so this will be linked to this user. The title will be some title, and then the category will be non-fiction. Give it another one, we'll do comma and enter. Here we'll do a article for Jessica, and it will be Jessica's new article or Jessica's monthly article. Category will be play, and do a comma, enter, and then we want to add one for Jonathan, and this will be Jonathan's new release, and it will be play again as a character or category, and then comma, and then we'll add one for Gemma, so that's number 2 or ID 2, and then we'll do Gemma's new list, for example, and this will be fiction this time. And then parentheses, comma, enter, we'll add one for Jonathan again, Jonathan's old release, and then we'll add this to non-fiction. So I think we have enough data to work with here. We'll just add a semicolon at the end, hit enter, and I think we've forgotten something, or you see right here, we added an opening double quote, but we didn't close it off, so that's going to break everything, and we're going to have to re-enter everything again. Just pressing up will give you everything that you've written previously. Then we'll fill this in, and then just clean it up right here, add the quotes, hit enter, and we've got 5 rows added. We select all from articles, and as you can see, we've got everything as we would want it. That's good. So as you can see, we've got this user ID right here, and this user ID basically gives us the information of the user. So this article belongs to which user, and then later we will use this user ID to pull the user's information into this table. But firstly, we will do we will try to manipulate this table, and to do that we're going to actually add a new column, right? So we want to add a new column to this articles table. So how do we do that? We want to alter table. Remember, to alter a table we use alter, the command alter table articles. We want to add a new column, and we'll just name this test column, right? So you give it the add keyword and then test column, which can be anything. This is basically the name of the new column that you're adding. And then we want to give it the data type. So this will be a var car, and we'll do 128, and we'll set it to not null, right? And I think that's it. Semicolon at the end, hit enter. Check the articles table, you'll see now we have a test column at the end. And you can also do describe articles to see the same thing. Now the point of this example is, as you can see at the bottom here, we've got test column. The point of this exercise is to add a new column and also to remove it again. So how would we remove a column? To remove a column, basically we use the same command alter table, and then the table name articles, and then we do drop and then the name of the column. So test column, and as you can see, we've dropped that table. To test it, we do describe articles, and that column has disappeared. Now if we just, if we go back to terminal, now we want to say recreate that column. So we'll just go up, keep hitting up until you find the command that you want. We want to add this command again, and we'll do describe to see it, and the column is back. Now we want to rename this column. Instead of removing it, we want to rename. We can do alter table articles, change, and then the old name followed by the new name. So the old name is test column, the new name will be column test, and we'll do var 50 this time, right? So we want to see a difference. So the old column was this information right here, and we do a describe articles again, and we should see that test column has changed to column test, varchar has 1 to 8 has changed to varchar 50, null no is now null yes, and the rest is the same. So that's how you would change or rename a column. Now we want to actually remove this column because we're not actually going to need it. So how do we remove that? If you remember, we'll do alter table articles, drop, and then the name of the column, which is column test now, and then semicolon, describe articles, and that column is gone, as you can see. Okay, we want to test one more thing. We want to see if we can add something that we've added previously. So let's say if we go all the way up and try to add the last entry that we added into articles. So this is the last entry that we added, right? If I go up here, as you can see, it's the last one. If I go down, it gives me this command, but we want to go up and pick this last command, which is user ID 4, sum title, non-friction, and this actually enters multiple ones. So we actually want to remove all of this and just keep one of them. We don't want to enter 3 or 4 different rows. We want to enter just one. So we'll pick the first one. We'll just delete this, and we'll enter this one right here. And we'll keep everything the same. Just make sure we end it with a semicolon. And as you can see now, if I do select from articles, we should see something that is duplicated. The last column right here has the same user as the first one, same title as the first one, and the same category as the first one, right? So say we want to select only the unique titles. So right here, we do select all the titles, select title from articles, but we want to select the unique ones. We don't want to select duplicates. So here we have a duplicate of some title. The way you do that is to use select distinct title from articles, and that should give you only one sum title and not 2. So what it does is it looks for the unique titles and it gives you them. Anything that has been repeated, it removes them automatically using this command, distinct. So just keep a note of that as well. That's very handy. Now, so we've done adding a new column, we've done describe, we've done renaming, we've done removing a column, we haven't deleted a table. So we could try to create a new table, right? And to create a new table, we will do create table, and then we'll set it as dummy table, dummy underscore table. And this dummy table will take in different columns, which will be parentheses and then the columns that you want to add in. So we'll add an ID as usual. Actually, we don't need an ID, that's fine. Keep an ID out of it. We'll add in a dummy one, and that will be a varchar, and then a dummy 2, and that will be varchar, and then a dummy 3, and that will be varchar, and that should be good to go. Parentheses, semicolon, enter. We have an error. We have an error at dummy 3 or dummy 2, actually after dummy 1. So I think what we need to do is give it a length. So we'll give it a length of 255. We'll give dummy 2 varchar a length of 255, and the last one a length of 255, and that should work now. There we go. If we do show tables, you'll see the tables that we have. We've got dummy table. If we describe dummy table, you have this dummy table with this column and this information. Now what I wanted to do here is I wanted to try, before we delete this table, because we're not going to use it, we're going to try to modify the data types of a certain column, right? So to modify, let's say we want to modify dummy 3 and change the data type from varchar to integer, for example. How would we do that? Again, we use the alter command because we're altering a table, and then we can do alter table, not articles but dummy table, and then we do modify because we want to modify. What do we want to modify? Dummy 3, and then basically give it the new data type that you want. So we do int, and we'll do unsigned, just like that. Hit enter, and then describe dummy table, and as you can see, we've changed dummy 3 from varchar data type to an integer. So that's looking good. Now let's try to rename a table. We have dummy table. Let's rename it to table dummy. How about that? Again, we're altering a table, so we use alter table, and then the name of the table, which is dummy table, and then we want to rename it to the new name, which will be table dummy, and then semicolon, hit enter. Now we show tables. You'll see that we have a table dummy instead of a dummy table. Now let's try to actually delete this table, right? Because we haven't done that yet. Drop table underscore dummy, and it's as simple as that. No, it's not. It says I have a syntax error next to table dummy. So drop, and I should say drop table, I believe, and then the name of the table. So drop table, name of the table, and show tables to see if it's actually deleted, and of course it's been deleted. Now we want to actually go back to dummy data or dummy table and add it again, because I want to run a few more examples very quickly. So this is the correct create table command. I'm going to hit enter, and if I show tables, you've got the table right here. And remember to switch between different commands that you've written in the past. You can just hit up and down, the arrow keys up and down on the keyboard, and you should be able to flick through all the commands that you've written previously. So now that we have that table again, what we want to do is we want to try and delete a row. Whoops. So we've got, what do we have in this table? Let's select all from dummy table. I can see it's at the top of my screen, but actually we just created a new table, so we've got nothing in it. So we need to make sure we go and find the insert command that we added earlier. If I can find it. Insert into dummy table. Does it not exist? Okay, it looks like it's gone, so you might have to redo it. But that's fine. That's practice for us. I shouldn't be using this, to be honest, especially as this is a tutorial, but let's do it. Insert into dummy table. That's an underscore, and then we want to add in, I don't remember the fields. We've got literally just dummy 1, dummy 2, dummy 3. Okay, So dummy1, dummy2, dummy3. Actually, we never added any data to this table, did we? Dummy1, dummy2, dummy3 is what we want to fill. So that's literally everything. We don't need to write this actually. And we'll do insert into dummy table values and then parentheses, enter. And here we add the values that we want to add. And that will be for dummy1 is a varchar, so it needs to be a string. We'll just put string and then comma, another string and then comma and then a number. And then close that off and then comma. Next one, parentheses, string2, string3, and then we'll do 20, right? And then we hit enter. And the last one, new data, and then we'll do string 5 and then we'll do 60. This is completely random data, so hopefully, did I miss something out? Semicolon. It says that I've opened a comma and I haven't closed it, and I can see right here I missed a comma, not a comma but a quote, single quote, so that's messed everything up. So let's just close it off and rewrite it. Delete, 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 comma, semicolon at the end, and then we need to close this right here. It says dummy data doesn't exist. I need to remove this extra P and this should work. So now if I do select everything inside dummy table, we should see that we have 3 different columns, dummy1, dummy2 and dummy3. Now what I want to try and do is I want to try and use the where keyword. So we want to be able to delete and use the where keyword at the same time. So delete allows us to delete a certain row. So let's say we want to delete this right here, this row right here. How would we select it? Usually you would have an ID column and you can select it using that. But right now we'll use the dummy3 as our ID column. So we'll do delete from the name of the table, which is dummy table. What do we want to delete? We want to delete where dummy3 is equal to 60. So it's basically going to check where dummy3 is 60, is going to delete all of that data. Let's do that. We check by selecting all, and as you can see, it's gotten rid of that row. So this is how you select something in the database and delete it using the delete command and the where command. Now let's say we have, let's just check what we have in our articles again from articles. And say we wanted to select anything in the database that has the word new, right? So the way we would do that is we could do select title, or we can do select everything from articles where the column title is like, because the new word right here, as you can see, it's under the title. So we're trying to find any article that has the title new, basically. So we do where title like, and then double quotes, open and close and double quotes, and inside of here we'll use the percentage sign. We'll do 2 of those, and then inside of here we'll add the text, so we'll add new inside of here. And what this tells it to do is basically select everything from articles where the title has new inside of it. So there's text before and there's text after, but there's new inside the title, basically the word new. So if we check this, you'll see that we get these 2 right here, right? Because nothing else has new except these 2, and that's working fine. Now what if we wanted to select everything that has the word release at the end of the string inside the title? Now we can do the same thing again, select from articles where title like, but this time we want to do remove this last percentage and we want the last word to be release. So basically this tells it to look for a title where it has something like release at the end and this text before it, right? So anything that ends with release, we're going to get it here. And as you can see, we get these two titles, or these two articles with the title Jonathan's new release and Jonathan's old release. So that's what I can find. And then there's one more using the same keyword or the command like, which is to use the percentage at the end instead of the start. And this will basically find any title that has the keyword and then some text after it. So we're going to do, this time we're going to do the letter J. How about that? So anything that has the letter J and then has something after it, we're going to get that. And as you can see, we get Jessica's monthly article, Jonathan's new release, and Jonathan's old release, because they both, or all three of them, start with the letter J and then they have something after them, or some text after that letter. So that's the difference between having the percentage at the end, the percentage at the start, and the percentage on both sides. Both sides means if this appears anywhere in the text. At the start, it means if this text is at the end of the text, and and at the end of the text, this basically means that this should appear at the start of the text, right? So that's that. Hopefully you're taking notes of that as well. Moving on, we want to try and look at what we have again in articles. And as you can see, we have different categories in here. We have non-fiction, we have play, we have fiction, we have non-fiction. So let's say we wanted to count how many articles we have under the category of non-fiction. The way you would do this is you would select and then you would count, parentheses, what do you want to count? Let's say we wanted to count everything inside of articles. We do count asterisk from articles, right? And you can see that this tells you we have 6 different articles inside of our table. What if we wanted to count only the categories that are non-fiction? How would we do that? Well, it would be something similar, but we would have to use something called group by. So we'll do select all from articles this time, but we'll group by, we want to group it by category, right? And we're getting an error here and it says, which is not functionally dependent on columns and group by clause. This is incompatible with blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I think let's try to write the command again. So select, instead of selecting everything, which might be an issue because you can't group IDs into a category, I guess, we will select the title and we will do a count separated by a comma, sorry. So title, comma, count, parentheses, category. And then from the table name, which is articles, and then group by, actually we don't want to count the categories. What do we want to count? We want to count the say ID, yeah, and we want to group by the category. So let's check that out. Again, we're getting an error, which is not functionally dependent on columns and group by clause. This is incompatible with SQL mode, only full group by. Okay, I see what the issue is. The issue is actually that you can't, as it says here, contains non-aggregate columns. So we're trying to pull the title, but the title is a string, so it's struggling to group it. Usually you'd be able to group numbers. So instead what I've done is I've just removed the title. So now I have select count ID from articles group by category, right? And what I'm going to add to this is I'm going to try to add the category, see if this works. Hit enter, and as you can see, we've got non-fiction, we've got 3 of those, we've got play, we've got 2 articles under play, we've got 1 article under fiction and 3 under non-fiction. So that's how you would do that. And you need to make sure that you don't add in a column that is of string type and is not non-aggregated, basically, because here, although category is a string, category is the one that we're grouping by, so it's able to fit into this table. But a title wouldn't be able to fit into this table. Like if you try to add a title column here, you wouldn't be able to just pick out one title, because this one has, for example, 3 titles, right? Each article has a different title, so you wouldn't be able to fit it in. So that's why it was giving us this error. But if you just take count for that, select category, the count ID, which counts the different articles, and then the name of the table, and group by the column that you want to group it by, which is category in this case, you'll get the following table. So that's how you would do a group by. Say we wanted to update something in the table, right? Instead of deleting something in the table, which we've done previously, we want to update a column. So let's just have a look at what we have again, articles. And here we have 2 different columns or 2 different rows that have a title, some title. So let's update the first one. How do we update the first one? You can use literally the command update, and then update. And then what do we want to update? We want to update a certain table, which will be articles, and we want to set the title to change to new title, new updated title, actually new updated title with no spaces. And then we need to tell it where to do this, so where ID equals to 1. So it's going to look for ID, basically it's going to update the table and set title to this value where ID is 1. So it's going to look for ID 1 and then update this title. Hit enter, hit select from articles, and as you can see, we've updated this table right here. Let's say we want to update the category as well from non-fiction to play. We do the same thing, update category this time. So set category equal to play, where ID equals 1. Hit enter, and if we look at that again, you see that now we have 3 different plays, and we can go back to the other command that we ran earlier to see how many categories we have or how many articles we have in every category. Hit enter, and as you can see now we have 3 play, 1 fiction, 2 non-fiction. If we go up a bit, you'll see we had 3 non-fiction, 2 play, and 1 fiction. Now we have 3 play and 2 non-fiction after that update. One last thing I'm going to ask you or challenge you to do is, if you look at the list of articles, we have all of them as active. Now I want you to set all of them to, not all of them actually, I want you to set ID number 4 to have an active article and ID number 6 to have an active article. So how would you do that? I'm going to give you a second to try, or maybe pause and try. I'm going to start now. So I'm going to do update, and then the name of the table, articles, set. We want to set the active to 1. So 1 would be active and 0 is inactive. And then we want to do that where the ID in, we've got a keyword in and then a list of IDs. So we want it to update 4 and 6. So ID number 4 and ID number 6 will get updated, and then we end it with a semicolon, hit enter, and if we just check select from articles again, you should see that this has been updated successfully. Now another thing we want to try and do is see how we select the articles and the ID is in ascending order. What if you wanted to do it from 6 to 1, so descending? We could do select from articles and then do order by, and then we can do which column we want to order it by, ID, and whether we want it to order by ascending or descending. ascending is the default, so descending is what we want. In here you see that it's showing 6 to 1 as we wanted. And if you wanted to order it by user ID or maybe title, we do descending for title, and you'll see that now it's been ordered by the title. We've done this example previously where we'd select the number of, or we get the count for the amount of articles in each category. So I wanted to ask if you could try and do the same, but to get basically the amount of active articles and the amount of inactive articles at the minute. So how would you do that? Well, you could do select, and then we want to select the active, and we want to count the ID, and we will do that from the articles table, and we will do group by, and we want to group it by active. So the ones will be grouped, each value will be grouped together basically based on the value, or the columns will be grouped together based on the value. So we do active, and as you can see 0 appears 4 times, and we have 2 articles that are active. So basically 0 is inactive, and we have 4 inactive articles, and 1 is active, so we have 2 active articles. And we can even change the name if you wanted. So for example, instead of having active, we can do active articles, for example, right? So we'll do active articles. I think you need to have active as active articles. There you go. And here we'll do, we'll do active as status, and then count ID as number of active articles. And the reason why I give it underscores is because I don't think I can do space. I will give it a try though. But as you can see, we've got the number of active articles 4, and that's not right. Actually, the number of articles is what we need to name that. So let's remove active. Now that makes more sense. Number of articles on the right side and the status on the left side. So we've got number of articles 4, which are status of 0, number of articles 2, which is the status of 1. Now we're going to try to do the same thing but without the underscore to see if it works or not, and I'm pretty sure it doesn't. As you can see, we get an error. Now one more thing we might want to try and do, and just to clear things up, I'm going to do Command L. So one more thing we want to try and do is we could order this by I think the order needs to go before the group by, so it needs to go somewhere here. Order by, what do we want to order it by? We want to order it by status, right? So we want it to order by status and descending first. So let's do that, and need a semicolon at the end. We have an error before group by. So let's see, instead of status, let's do active. So order by active, and the error is still showing up. So maybe, just maybe, we'll do group by first and then order by, then we'll do active again and descending. And as you can see, we actually have it set up now so that it shows us which ones are active first, or how many we have that are active and how many we have that are not active. And that is perfect. So there's 2 more things that I wanted to add that I've actually forgotten about. The first one being the limit keyword. And the way you use this is, if, let's see, the databases that we have again. If we use ZTH, and show the tables that we have. So let's just select everything from articles, for example. Okay, so now the keyword that I wanted to use was limit, and this limits the number of rows that you get. So right here we have 6 rows. Let's say we want to limit them to 3. We'll add limit and then the number 3, and we get 3 rows back. You can also give it 2 digits separated by a comma, and this will tell it to start at a certain point and return a certain amount. So start at 1 and return 3. As you can see, it goes to this first row, or skips the first row, goes to the second row, and you get 3 rows. I believe 0 is where it starts, so 1 is row number 2, and so on. Row number 1 is 0, and row number 2 is 1, and so on. So this is where you start, and this is the amount of rows you get back. So that's fairly straightforward. The other thing is, I wanted to actually go through an example where we select or add a index of type full text. So remember, there was 3 different types of indexes. There was an index, there was a primary key, and there was a full text. So right now we'll do a full text, and the way you do that is use an alter table and then the table name. So we'll do this on the articles table, articles, and we will do, what do? We do add full text, and then we add the columns that we want to include in the full text. So we'll do title and category for now. We'll give this a try, and then semicolon, and that should set it up for us. Let's do describe articles to see what's happening. And as you can see, we have a mo that has been added as a key here to title, and there's nothing that's been added on the category, which is interesting. But let's try to search for something now. So there's a match against that I wanted to try, and the way you would do this is by using select, then we'll do ID, and then we'll do the match, and then we'll give it the columns of the match. So we want to check, we want to search title and category, close the parentheses, and then against. In here we want to write the words that we want to search for. So let's say we just want to search for Gemma, and maybe space and fiction, or maybe play, to see what we get. Close it off, and then we'll say in natural language mode, hopefully I spelled that right, and it says unknown column ID, unknown column ID. Did I not select from the table? Yes, I missed the table out. So from articles in the end, and as you can see right here, we've got the matches. And if you look at, let's just do select all from articles, and you'll see that number 1 doesn't have many matches. It has play, so it has a little bit of a match, and then there's no Gemma. Number 2, there's no Gemma, but there is play. Number 3, there is no Gemma, but there is play in the category. And then number 4 has Gemma and doesn't have play. So as you can see, we've got 0.6. So I believe the closer the number is to 1, the higher the match is, and the closer it is to 0, there's no match. So 5 and 6 have no matches at all. So let's try the same thing again, but without the play this time. And as you can see, we've got zeros all around except with number 4, ID number 4 right here. Okay, so the other method is using the Boolean mode, and the Boolean mode gives you more flexibility, I think. Boolean mode, or more control. So we'll do Boolean mode, and inside Boolean mode we can choose different words that we want to match, and we could give one word, for example, a plus, and another word a minus. So we'll do minus woman and plus Gemma. Plus means that it needs to find this word for it to match, otherwise it won't return any row. And minus means that it needs to, this word should not be in the row, otherwise it doesn't get returned if it is in the row. Gemma means that, plus means that it needs to be in the row so that it gets returned, otherwise it doesn't. So let's just press enter, and as you can see again, we've got 0.6 for number 4. What if we do minus? We get a 0. So now it's not returning the row that has Gemma in because we have a minus Gemma, which means minus means we don't want to see the row if this exists in it, right? So once more, plus is if you want a word to be within the row, and minus is if you want to exclude the word from the search. So that's basically the Boolean and the natural language mode. You can play around with this, but this is the basic concept. We'll try one more, and we'll do, what can we do? Up there we've got, let's put J as a letter, and then we don't want the letter S, and see what we get. We don't get much, so I guess it's looking for a full word. So maybe we'll give it Jonathan, and again we're not getting anything there. Jonathan's, let's try this. Again we're not getting anything. Let's do select all from articles so you can see what we have, and let's try some title then. We'll do plus some title, and we'll hit enter, and as you can see we're matching this one. Let's add a minus here and do Charles, enter. We're still matching the last one. For some reason we couldn't match Jonathan. I guess I spelled it wrong. It's supposed to say Jonathan, but it says Jonathan's. And as you can see, we matched it now because I got the words, I've spelled the word correctly. Let's try one more because I've tried too many now. And we've tried release and we've matched it. If we do minus release, what will happen? It doesn't match. So that's basically a match against. It helps you search through the full text, and the limit is to limit the amount of rows that you get back. Next up, we want to try something a bit different, and we're going to try to look at relationships. So firstly, before I go through this theory, let's have a look at what we have in the two main tables, the articles and from the users. Now, as you can see, we have in the articles, we have ID, user ID, title, category, and active as the columns, right? So this user ID column is supposed to link us to the user table down here. So for every ID, we have a matching row within the users table. For every user's ID in the articles table, we have a row under the users table. So if you take a look at the first row in the articles, you've got user ID 4. So this is basically saying that this article belongs to user ID 4. If you go to the users table and look at user ID 4, we have Aya at dummy.com. So now say we wanted to pull this data in to this table right here. How would we do that? Well, we would use something called join, where you join multiple tables together. So what we want to do here is we want to select the title, the category, also the ID and active from articles. So we start with ID, and because we're actually going to select multiple things from different tables, we're going to use articles.id, and we're going to use that as AID. So we're going to label it AID for articles ID. We're going to get the user ID as well. So articles.userid. And then we're going to do articles.title and articles.category and a.active. So instead of doing articles each time, I'm going to change it to A, and I'm going to show you how you can do this, but let's just try and replace all these articles with AID, A.id, A.title, A.userid, and A.category, just to simplify things so we don't have to keep writing articles. So now that we've done that, now we want to select things from the user table. So we'll select the username. So we'll do users.name, and we will select the user or users.email. Again, instead of users, we'll do you, and I'll show you how you set this up. So now that we've done that, we want to select all of this from our main table, which will be the articles, and then we have to give it A next to it, just so that it knows what this A is referring to. Right here you've got the articles table, and next to it we've got the A, so it knows to look for A in the articles table, or that's what A means, articles. And then if we hit enter, in here we add the join keyword. So we want to join which table? The users table. So we write users, and then we'll give it a U so that it knows that U stands for user or users, just like we added it here. And then on, so we want it to join the users table on which column or which condition. And the condition is basically where a.userid equals to user or u.id. So here all we're saying is that we want to select the articles ID, which is the first column, and name it AID. We want to select the, actually we can keep this, let's just keep it as is. Then we want to select the articles.userid, which is the second column, articles title, third column, articles category, fourth, and articles active, fifth column. And we also want to select the user's name, the user's email from articles, which is our main table. And then we're joining the secondary table, users, on a certain condition. And that condition is where articles user ID, for example 4, is equal to UID. So it's going to look for 4 here and then match it to this. So it's going to bring this and match it up here. So let's just add a semicolon and have a look at this. And as you can see, now we have AID, which is articles ID, and then the user ID, title, category, active, name, and email. And if you wanted to rearrange this, you can just add username and email at the start or close to the start. So we can just bring that up here. Instead of user ID, we can just do u.name and u.email. And I think I've got an error here, and let me just check what that is. So we've got an extra colon or extra comma before from. Remove it, and as you can see now we've moved name and email here. We've got article ID, name, email, title, player, active. So effectively we've joined a second table to the first table. And this is the basic joining method. Now there's another one, or another way of joining, called the left join, and there's also the right join. And I'm going to show you what these mean very quickly. To do that, I'm actually going to go to W3 Schools MySQL join, and I'm going to go to MySQL joins, and here at the bottom, if you scroll down, you'll see you've got left join and right join. Inner join is what we just did, and that is the default type of join. We've got left join, which returns all the records from the left table, which is the first table. In our case, that was the articles. It returns all the records from the articles table and the matching records from the right table. And if there's no matching records, what does it return? It returns null. And on the right side, or the right join, it returns all the records from the table 2. So it returns all the records from the users table. and matching records, if any, from the left table. So if it finds a match, it will return it. If it doesn't, it will put null where it didn't find anything. Whereas an inner join, it will literally only return if there's a match. So that's the difference between the three. We will look at these later on as well when we're completing our actual project, when we're putting everything together. But for now, this is how you do a join in MySQL. Again, going through the command, we select the columns that we want to display and then add a keyword from and choose our main table, which is articles. And then we want to join another table. So join table name and then on, which is a keyword, and then what we want to join it on. So usually you need to have this sort of column to match it to another table. So say you have a comments table or a posts table, and inside that posts table you have a column called comment underscore ID, and then you have another table called comments, and that comments table has different IDs or rows with different IDs. Now what that comment underscore ID column in the posts table does is it links it to the comments table. So this is what this does. Without this user ID, we wouldn't be able to link it to the users table right here. So you need to make sure that when you're setting up your table and you're setting up your columns, you need to make sure, or you need to think about the actual structure of the data that you're going to be saving and how you're going to link it to one another. So now that we've gone through that, we can quickly go through the logical operators as well, which is something that we might have touched on, but let's have a look here. Basically what we're going to do here is we're going to try to use some of these logical operators. So select all from articles just to see what we have once again, and now we want to select, let's say we want to select the categories that are equal to play. So we want to select all from articles where category is equal to play, but we also want to select one more thing. We want to select the ones that have an ID of, or only the active ones that are in play, right? So we want to select the active articles that have a category of play. So we can do and active equals to 1, semicolon, enter, and as you can see we have none. What if we change the active to 0? We have 3 inactive category or play category articles. So that's how you would use the logical operators. This is basically the logical operator and you can also use or. So now we're selecting either category equals to play or active. And as you can see, we have active and we have play. Active equal to 0 and play is a category. So we've selected this top row because it's play or active 0. And the same for this one and the same for this one. The last one we selected not because it's play, but because the active is 0. So it's taken these two, and the logical operator has allowed us to select between these two basically. And I mean, we've come across this in PHP and JavaScript as well, so this should be straightforward. The last thing I want to go through, or actually we have quite a bit to go, but one of the things I wanted to go through, which is an important concept to go through, we're going to have to do a bit of theory here. So I'm going to go back to my file index.php, and we're going to create a new comment. So this part will be relationships, and these are basically the relationships between different data in your database. There are 3 different types mainly, and the first one is a one-to-one relationship. So one-to-one relationship, and that is basically where as you saw here, an article can be linked to a user ID, and the user ID can have an article linked to them. and the only difference is that for user ID they can have multiple articles. So that's a one-to-many, which we'll come to after one-to-one. But for one-to-one, there's basically something linking the one row from one table to another row in another table. So there is a one-to-one relationship. For example, one user or each user can have a single account, and each account belongs to one user, right? So if I try to show you this in a database structure, let's say we have a table of users table, and within that table we have an ID and we have a name, right? And we also have image ID. We're gonna put 1, we're gonna put N as a name, just random, and then image ID is 2, and then 2 P, and then we'll put 3, and then one more we'll do 3, and then C, and then we'll do 1. And then on the other side we have a table of images, so images table, that should say table, and here we'll do a ID again, and then we'll have the name once more, and then the user ID. Here we'll put 1, and then we'll put a random name, and then the user ID will be 3. And then we have 2, say we'll put Q here, and then the user ID will be, you can put 3 here, or maybe 1. And then number 3 or ID 3 will have a name of L, and then they will be 2. The user ID will be 2. So basically here what you're looking at is a users table and an images table that has some relationship between each of their rows. So let's take the users table, the user with ID 1, which has a name of N. They have a link to an image with an ID of 2. So if you go to images table ID 2, you'll see that this one is linked to a user ID that has the number 1. And basically this is a one-to-one relationship where the user is linked to the image, to a single image, and an image is linked to a single user. Now the other example or the other type of relationship is a one-to-many, and this is similar to what we just did. The articles table and the users table, a single user can have multiple articles under their name, and a single article is linked to a user. So one will be the user, 2 articles, and the many will be articles. So one user has many articles, and many articles have one user. Right, so that's the one-to-many. I don't need to create the tables there because we've already done that. The other one is many-to-many, and this is the interesting one. To show you this, I'm gonna do, let's say, again, I'm gonna use the same example of images, but this time I'll use it with posts. So we'll do images table, and we'll do ID and a name, and we'll do 1, and then we'll just copy paste this 5 times. I think that's 5, 3, 4, 5, and then we'll have a posts table, and this will have an ID and a title, and this will be 1. I think we can copy and paste again 5 times, and this will be 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So basically what we have here is an images table and a posts table, and the idea is that a single image can be used by many posts, and a single post can use many images, right? So it's a many-to-many relationship. So let's say you have a website and you have a single post on it. That post can have many images, and then another post can use many images as well, including the images that was used on the previous post. So there's a mix and match between all the images and posts. each one can be linked to multiple other ones. And the way you would do this, as you can see, we don't have the extra column here to link them. So we don't have a post ID or an image ID column. And that's because we're going to have a new table, an intermediate table as they call it, which will link both of them. So we'll have a table that we can call, for example, the convention is to use post image or image posts, basically the one that comes first, the letter that comes first. So image post table or images posts table, and here we'll have the image ID and we'll have the post ID, and here you will basically define the different mix and matches that we mentioned earlier. So you'll have one is linked to 2, one is linked to 3, post 3, image ID 4 is linked to post ID 5, post ID 3 is linked to image ID 2, image ID 5 is linked to post ID 1. So this is just a mix and match between all of them, and this is where we record basically all the relationships. So again, here we have a relationship between image ID 1 and post ID 2. So image ID will be pointing to this, and post ID will be pointing to this. So this and this are linked. Image ID 1 is also linked to post ID 3. So this image is being shared by these two posts. And the same is true for, let's see, any posts that are sharing. Post ID 3 is sharing, post ID 3 right here is sharing number 1 and number 2 in images. So as you can see, we're basically running a relationship, a many-to-many relationship within this setup right here. And that is how you would set up the database for it, or the tables within the database. So again, we're going to have a look at all of these. I think we're going to end up using the one-to-many and many-to-many in our example once we put everything together in the next part of the series. But for now, I think we can stop or end the relationships part right here and move on to the transaction section. And the transaction section is a bit more complicated, so I'm actually going to create a new page for this instead of writing a comment, because I think that's better. So we'll do transaction.php, and in here we'll create the tags for PHP again, open and closing tags, and we'll try to get, and we'll start with this. I'm actually going to try to make this as practical as possible, so we will use the terminal more than we'll write comments. But what transactions basically allow us to do is it allows us to make sure that when we run our commands on MySQL, we run them in a ordered fashion. So command number 2 won't run until command number 1 is finished, and command number 3 won't run until command number 2 is finished, and so on. And you will also want to make sure that command number 1 is successful before command number 2 runs, because command number 2 might be linked to command number 1. For example, command number 1 is inserting for example, if this was a bank application, command number 1 will insert some money into the account, so you're increasing the balance, right? Now command number 2, what that's going to do, it's going to update the user that the command has been, or the balance has been updated. So you don't want the user to be notified that the balance has been updated unless the balance has been updated. So you need to make sure that command number 2 doesn't run unless command number 1 runs and finishes running and also is a successful command, right? So in that case, you would use something like transactions, so that the transactions allows the commands to run in a specific order, and they only run once the previous command is successful. So I'm going to give you a few examples, and to do that we'll create a new table. So we'll do create table, and we'll use the bank example here. So we'll create a table called accounts, and we'll give it a number int column and a balance column. with a float data type and a primary key of number. So we're setting number to a primary key here, and then we're closing off everything. And before the semicolon though, we need to choose the engine, because this actually only works with a specific engine, and that engine is InnoDB. And then we want to hit enter, and we want to describe accounts, right? So if we just check show tables, you see that we have these tables and we have the accounts up here that we've described. We've got 2 columns, number and balance, and we have a primary key in number right here. So that's looking good. Now we want to try and populate the accounts table. So we want to insert into accounts number and balance. I don't think we need to write number and balance because that's the only thing that it has. So values, and then the values you want to add in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 1025.50 for example. And then that's one thing. Let's do space after that, and then this is only because we want to add in 2 different rows, but if you want you can just add them one by one. So semicolon and then enter and then add the next one, but I was just trying to group them, but maybe it's better for you to start off doing it this way. If you want to group them, you can just use a comma. So I'm just adding another value here, 67890 for the number, and for the balance 140.00. Let's have a look at what we have. Let's do select all from accounts, and as you can see we have these values. So that's looking good. And what we want to do here is we want to write begin and then hit semicolon. So this is going to begin a transaction, and then we want to update accounts and set the balance to balance plus 25.11, where number equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're updating this balance right here by what? By 25.11. Semicolon, hit enter, and what we can do here is do commit. Before we do commit, we'll just check the table, and as you can see the table has been populated with a new value, and we're going to do commit and then check the table again, and as you can see it's still the same. So what commit does, it basically gives you the opportunity to actually save the data. So until you do commit, everything is temporary when you start a transaction, because a transaction allows you to maybe go back and roll back basically the commits or the commands that you've ran. So if you've added or changed the balance but things haven't worked out with other commands, or there was an error, you can always roll back and nothing will be saved. So to show you an example of this, we will actually try this out now. And first thing we will do is we will try to begin a transaction, and this step is very important. So make sure you begin a transaction. Whoops. What's happening here? Begin a transaction, hit enter, and then we want to update the accounts and set the balance to equal to balance minus 250, where number equals to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So basically we're removing or minusing 250 from this balance right here. Hit enter, and we want to do the other row as well. Account set balance equals to balance. This time we add 250 to it, where number equals to 67890. And as you can see, select from accounts, we have updated the balance successfully for both rows. But what we're going to do now is roll back, because we realized there's an issue and we don't want to commit the changes. We do roll back, and if this is correct, this should return things to how they were. And as you can see, we've gone back to the same balance that we had previously. So that's working fine, and that's how you would use rollback. And just make sure when you start the transaction you use begin, because otherwise rollback wouldn't work. And commit, again, is to commit changes to the database to make sure they're saved, because otherwise everything is temporary until then. Now we have something called a explain select as well, or explain. So explain is a command that explains the query that you're running. So let's say select from accounts, and we hit that, and as you can see, you've got this table right here explaining to you the query that you just ran. So let's add a bit more to the query. We'll do where number equals to 1 2 3 4 5 6. Well, I think it's just 5, right? Yeah. So as you can see here, we've got ID, select type, table, partitions, type, possible keys, key length, ref, rows, filtered. So this gives you information about the query that we've just ran, and it says we've matched one row, right? So that might come in handy. The last thing I wanted to cover is the ability to dump a database. So let's say you have this database and you're migrating to another server or another computer, and you want to save all of these databases basically so that you can continue from where you left off on another computer, for example. The way you would do this is you would use a command called MySQL dump. So we'll actually exit out of this, and to exit out of this we'll do exit. There we go. We just need to do it twice. And now here I'll try to run MySQL dump to see if it works, and as you can see it does work. So just make sure you're in the right directory, and the different directories depend on the different OS that you're using and the way you're running your MySQL. So we actually don't need this transaction file anymore, so I'm going to delete it. And I might just put a comment here for the transactions. Transaction commits changes to DB, rollback rolls back changes from rolls back changes. Yep. To the start, and just one more comment, make sure you use begin at the start of the transaction. And I think that's it. There was one more thing, I believe, and that was you need to make sure that the database is a type of InnoDB, or the table is InnoDB engine, right? If you remember, when we created the table, we used the same engine. So we did it was actually engine InnoDB. So transaction only work on tables using engine DB, and that's an important fact. So we're just gonna indent this and move on. Now back to where we were, the MySQL dump. We were looking at the paths, I believe. So the paths are right here, depending on what you're using. If you use an example, then these are the paths. For Windows, you can do this, and for Mac OS, you can use this path, and Linux, you can use this path if you use an example. Otherwise, you should be able to directly just do what I'm doing, MySQL dump. As you can see, it's working. So here we'll do MySQL dump, and then we will do basically we have to give it the U, which is the user. So we'll give it the root user, and then the password is empty. So now it just needs from you the name of the database that you want to dump to a file and the file name that you want to have. So we want to dump the ZTH database that we created, right? And then you do a greater than sign, and then you do the name of the file. So we'll do zth.sql, right? So we'll do zth.sql, and that should dump it, and just hit enter. And as you can see, that has ran. Now the only thing left is to look where, or to check where the file has been created, and it's created right here. So now we have a dump of the entire database. And if you want to restore this database, right, what you could do is, so we'll go back to MySQL root p, basically we're logging back in, and then we want to remove the database, or we want to empty the database out actually. So we remove all the tables from the database, and the way to do that is, let's just see the databases. We have ZTH at the end, use ZTH. Now we're using the database, and we want to delete all the tables. So we'll do drop, and then table, and then the names of the tables that we have, users, and then we have accounts, and then we also have, what was the last one, articles, and then we do show tables. We've got one more table to drop, and that is the dummy table. So now that we've done that, in order to bring in our SQL file right here, if you want to import the database from here, you need to make sure that the database actually exists. So again, we have that database right here at the bottom, ZTH. So make sure you create that using create database, and then the name of the database, and then you can exit back out of this and then do MySQL, and you can do, whoops, so what you can do is just give it MySQL -u for root or user root, password is empty, so we'll leave that empty, and then we do the name of the database, which is ZTH, and then we'll do smaller than, less than, and then the name of the database, which is, I don't actually remember, ZTH, of course, and then SQL. And that should effectively pull in the database. So to check, we'll log in to MySQL again, just run this command, hit enter, and we'll show databases, and then use ZTH. And then here we want to show tables, and as you can see, we have the tables back again, and we can just verify by looking at the accounts, for example, and everything is back to how it was. So that's how you create backups for the data that you have, and that's how you can dump and restore the backup, or restore databases from a backup file. I think with that, we've covered most of this video. The only thing left is to actually use MySQL with PHP now, so that we can actually start working with real data and prepare ourselves for the final project. So well done if you've gotten this far. Just try to practice the commands that we've ran, selecting, creating tables, creating databases, tables within these databases, and adding data to these tables, trying to change the different columns, the data types within these columns, trying to remove, to delete, to just play around with the commands that we've used. All these commands that we've looked at right here, the altering the tables, creating, describe, just basically going through the commands that we've covered up here. And trust me, with time you will definitely become an expert in MySQL, and it's definitely a thought after skill, so you'll be doing yourself a favor. Now let's jump right into our last section, which is to create a connection between our PHP and MySQL. So I'm going to create a file called db.php, and within this file we're going to actually create the tags for PHP, of course, and then we're going to do we're going to start defining some variables, and these variables will hold information about our database and our connection. So we'll do server name, which will be localhost by default, and we'll do username, which will be the username for your server, your MySQL server. For mine, or for me, it's root. Basically the same thing we were using up here. Where is it? Let me scroll up. Same thing we were using here for username and password. We're going to add it here, but this time we're accessing it using PHP. My password is empty. Now that we've set this up, we can try to run everything in a try and then catch. And here we'll do we actually need to give it the PDO exception first, and then that will be fine. And here we'll do echo connection failed if the connection fails, and then the message, get message, right? So in the try block is where we're going to add the code to connect to the database. Try connecting here. So to connect, we'll create a new variable called connection, or CONN, and then we'll do new PDO, which is a method or a PDO instance representing a connection to a database. So we'll do MySQL, and then we'll do colon host equals to, and then we'll give it the server name, which is the host, and then we will add in the database name that we want to connect to. We don't need to actually connect to a database right away, so we'll not add a database name. What we will do is we'll add a username and a password. So we'll add username and password separated by a comma. So this class takes in 3 different values: the host with the MySQL at the start, the username and the password, and then we want to set the PDO error mode to exception so that we get exceptions if there's errors. Con set attribute PDO attribute error, and this is not something that you need to memorize, but you will get used to it. It'll become muscle memory the more you do it. Error mode underscore exception. I mean, I still have to look these things up once in a while. And then we're going to output connected successfully if it has connected, right? So we just want to add 2 L's here, and that's that. Now what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and run this file and see what we get. So if you go to db.php, you'll see that it's connected successfully. So that's worked. So now we're connected to the database using PHP. And we want to start interacting with our database, right? So we'll do connection. We'll create a query first, and we'll create a new database, and we'll name it phpdb or db from php, just because we can. And then we'll do echo database created successfully, and that will run if everything runs fine. Otherwise we'll get an error, and usually we'll have this in another try catch, but we're writing everything in a single try catch at the minute. So between this we need to actually run the query, and to do that we'll do con execute. And as you can see, it says execute an SQL statement and return the number of affected rows. So execute, which takes in a statement, and that is the SQL variable that we've written here, and that will run. If there's an error, it will go down to here. We'll just put error occurred this time because we're running a lot of code inside the same try code or try block. And if there's no errors, it will output database created successfully. So let's refresh, and as you can see, connected successfully, database created successfully. And to test that, you go back here and do show databases, and we should see a DB from PHP. As you can see, we have created it successfully. And now moving on, we want to create a table. So we'll do SQL create a table, or maybe not SQL, because you know it's an SQL. SQL, which is basically the query, create table, and we want to create a table, anything random really. We'll use dummy for now because we're just trying to make sure that everything is working. We'll hit a few enters and we'll end with a parentheses. Here we want to add in the columns and the data types for each column. So we'll do ID int unsigned auto increment primary key, as we usually do, and then we'll do dummy1 varchar 30 not null, dummy2 varchar 30 not null. I think that's enough. We might add a timestamp as well. Yeah, let's do that. We'll do date time, or DT for date time, and then we'll do timestamp default, and the default value will be current timestamp, and then on update, so every time we update this, it will update the current timestamp automatically. And that's it. I think this will give us the table that we're looking for. And then we'll do con execute. We want to execute this command that we've just written, or this query, and then we should get an error if there's an issue. Otherwise we'll say dummy table created successfully, and we want to add a new line here. We want to add a new line here, and we want to add a new line here. The only issue right now that I'm seeing is that when you create a database, you need to actually use it before you can create a table. So we're missing a command here. We need to add SQL equals to use DB from PHP. So we've created the database above. Now we need to use it, DB from PHP, and this will only create it if it doesn't already exist. So use DB from PHP. We need to execute this command, exec or exec SQL, and if that runs, we want to output. We don't want to output anything actually. So we'll use this database so that we can create this table, and then once this table is created, we want to give it some content, right? So let's just test this out very quickly. Refresh, you see there's an error, can't create database already exists. So once you've already created it, you can't recreate it. So we comment this out, now we check this, and as you can see, connected successfully, dummy table created successfully. So if we check we use DB from PHP, and then we show tables, we should see a dummy table, and we describe this dummy table, and as you can see, we've got everything that we've created from the PHP script. And now moving on, we want to add one more thing, and that is to actually populate the table. So we'll do insert into dummy. We want to add dummy1 and dummy2 only. So dummy1 and dummy2, and then new line, we'll close this off with a semicolon, new line values, and then the dummy data is a string, so we'll do I'm a string, and then comma $, and that's pretty much it. That's enough. And we'll just bring this up here, and we'll execute this command with our connection, x SQL And if you're thinking this is a lot of code, don't worry, I'm going to go through it one by one. But for now, we're just finishing it off. So execute the command that we've just written or the query that we've just written. And then if it's successful, we want to add new record created successfully, semicolon. So now we're going to refresh this. If I can just get the browser up, and it says base table of view already exists, table dummy already exists. So we're trying to create a table that already exists right here. So we'll close this off, and this, and this. We'll comment all of these off, and now we're basically selecting the database and then adding data to the database. So let's do this, refresh, new record created successfully. Excuse me. And let's just check the actual database right here. If we do select all from dummy, is that the name of the table? Yes, it is. And as you can see, we've updated this, or we've added this row with a dummy 1 I'm a string and dummy 2 do, but at the same time we got an ID and we got a DT, which is a data time or a timestamp that was auto generated for us, and that is looking good. And all of that was done using our PHP code. So now I'm going to go through this code one more time just to try and explain it a bit better. At the very top, we created our credentials for the database that we'll be using, the host, the username, the password, and then we added a try catch block, which is to see if there's any errors. If there's any errors, we're going to catch it and output this message. Inside the try block, we created a connection variable where we will hold the actual connection, the PDO class, which is basically the object that we use to interact with MySQL. And this is out of the box with PHP. So with this class, you can run queries on the table and then on the MySQL engine in general. Next up, we've added the error exceptions. So we've done can't basically access the object. We set attributes and we've set error mode and exception. And then we've just echoed out connected successfully. And this will get outputted if you have connected successfully, otherwise you'll see this error. Next, we created a database using this variable right here, which was holding our query. And this basically executes the query. So you access the object and then you run a function inside this object and you give it an argument of the query. And then you output this if things are working fine. And then the same thing here. Once you create a database, you need to start using it. So we run the use command and use the database. Again, we use this piece of code to execute the query. And then next up, we create a table. Again, we write a query to create the table. This is all stuff that we've covered previously on the command line, but now we're doing it through the script. So again, it's the same syntax. Everything is the same, except that now we're saving it in a variable and then we're running that variable within this execution function, right? And again, we're outputting this once it's created. And then after that, we're running an insert command to add some values into our table. And then we're executing it. And then we're outputting again that everything has worked fine. The reason why we're commenting things out is because once you've created a database, you can't rerun this again. So what you should be doing is really checking if the database exists, and if it does, then using it. If it doesn't exist, then you should create it, right? But this is just a introduction, and we will be doing that in the next video when we'll be putting everything together and we will have to connect to the database once again. So we'll write a better script than this where you will actually check if the database exists. If it does, then use it. If it doesn't exist, create it. And then if you've already used it, or if you've started using it, then we can create a table and we can move on. If the table doesn't exist, if it does exist, then do nothing. So for example, for create a table, there's a command called if not exists, I believe. So this will create a table if it doesn't exist, and I'll just show you very quickly. If I save this and make sure I haven't uncommented something that I don't want to use, this is fine, this is fine, this is fine, this is all looking fine. So this is going to try to create the table if it doesn't exist. If it does exist, it will do nothing, right? So we're going to do that, and we're going to comment out this, and we're just going to see what happens here. Refresh, and as you can see, new record created successfully. If we check the table, you'll see that we have two new or a single new row. So now we have two rows, right? We didn't recreate the table, we just ignored it. We basically ignored this command because the table already exists. So for the database, there's something similar, I believe. Let's try it out actually, since we're here, before we end this video. Create database if not exists, and we will try to refresh this, and as you can see, again, that's working fine. We just need to make sure we comment this out. So this will create database if it doesn't exist, this will create table if it doesn't exist, and you won't get any errors, and the code will actually run just fine. So that's it for this video. We actually covered a whole lot of stuff, and honestly, if you watch this video to the end of it, then well done. You are very close, very, very close to the end of the series. There's only one more part where we're going to put everything together: the HTML, CSS, JavaScript, PHP, in today's video, the MySQL. Put everything together, create a real world example, and after that, I can guarantee you that you can put this project on your CV and start applying, and someone will reach out to you, and you will actually start working very, very soon, because this is the skill that is in demand that you've picked up, and there is short of supply when it comes to this skill. So just make sure you stay tuned for the next video. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. That helps the channel, and it also gives me motivation to create more content for you guys. And make sure you comment as well if you have any issues or you have any questions that you'd like me to answer. Like the video if you've found it useful, and I'll see you in the next one.